Hey, this is Miranda, and you're listening to or watching Their Lived Experiences.
It's interesting to me, like we can still connect what happened in South Carolina that many years ago with Victoria Dalee to issues that you dealt with in my childhood.
Yes. It's just that by that time, I was much more vocal, and I knew I don't have to shop here. I'll go 2 blocks instead of going one.
Mm.
So,
I have a story I want you to tell me
okay.
about Hughbie and Rebecca. And I want the whole story.
Oh, the whole story. Okay. I grew up, I guess, always knowing about Hughbie and Rebecca. On the weekends, not every weekend, but some weekends, they would come and they would stop at different people's home and they would visit on Sunday afternoon. That's what we did. That was our recreation. So they would come and, your parents said, oh, here comes Hughbie and Rebecca. And they would come in that little truck and they would sit and they would talk for a couple of hours and then they would leave.
Yeah, now you got to tell people why that was remarkable.
Rebecca was Black and Hughbie was white. Okay. Hughbie was also come during the week and go fishing with the uncle. I had an uncle and he could go fishing with him.
Tell me what it was like. Okay, so here you have this interracial couple in pre-civil rights movement, South Carolina. Mm-hmm. What was that like? Was it scandalous in the community? Did people know they were in a relationship?
All the Black people do. I mean, well, everyone knew. The white people knew too. But they weren't accepted in the white community as a couple, but they were accepted in the Black community. That's why they would come to our home and our community and visit people, because they were accepted. They could come together and sit and have a conversation on a Sunday afternoon.
How did the white people treat them?
I don't really know, because I only knew them from my community. When he died, he left everything to Rebecca, and he was quite prominent. And he had land and everything. He left everything to Rebecca. Well, his family tried to get the will overturned and everything. Well, to everyone's surprise, they were legally married.
Woo-hoo! She had a marriage certificate and everything.
There was nothing they could do. She had 3 children previously. The youngest one was a little boy whenever they got together. And he just said that was his boy. He just loved that boy so much. And he didn't have any children of his own.
So what did his family do? What did his extended family do when they found out that they were legally married?
Well, there was nothing they could do. They backed off.
That is so funny to me. So this interracial couple decided, we're going to do our thing. We don't care what the law says or the community says, and nothing you can do about it. Mm-hmm. I think it's fascinating because whenever we hear these stories about interracial couples from back in the day, it's always, oh, the KKK came in the night and crosses were being burnt. No, they just got on with their lives and went hang out with the Black people and did what they needed to do.
Yeah. If he saw his family, he couldn't take her with him. He would have to go by himself, because as far as they were concerned, it was just a Black woman living in his house, and that was it.
But did they think she was the maid?
Yes. I mean, but you would have to be blind to, even as a child, I knew better than that. There was more to this relationship than being a maid. They were a very comical couple too. They were both very talkative and they could talk over each other and, oh, you be quiet and blah, 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 blah. But evidently they had a deep love for each other. I mean, he was able to just leave his whole family for Rebecca.
See, that's the kind of movie we need. We need that kind of love and representation in the movies. I love it. Here, I'll get you to tell me one last story, but I know this is a sad story. Tell me about your grandfather. And can you tell me like the whole story starting with his father? Okay.
His father was Ceasar Dennings. He had 13 children. And he owned our whole community that I was raised in. In his will, he left each child 13 acres of land.
So he left 13 children, 13 acres each.
Yes.
That's a wealthy man.
So there were several brothers. I don't know how many brothers it was, but there were several brothers. And there was no telephone back there. This was back during the time when, blacks weren't supposed to have anything, and whites would come in and just hurt you, kill you, just take your land or whatever. If there was a white person coming into the community, a brother would fire a gun. That let the other brothers know that there was somebody coming in that community that shouldn't be there. So they end up grabbing their gun, and there were crops like corn. So they knew where to stand. They had a plan, they had a battle plan. And as the person was driving through, they would, each person, when that car passed, they would shoot their gun. That put fear in the heart of those people.
So they were tracking the white people that came in unannounced into their neighborhood.
Yes. That was the plan.
Tell me the bit about how they told white people to tell them ahead of time.
You can come, and if any of our people want to work for you, they can. It's up to them. But you have to let us know. And if you let us know you're going to come through on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, there'll be no problem. But if you didn't tell them, it was a problem.
Right. So white people needed to announce themselves before they came in, else gunshots were fired and you were going to be tracked.
Yes. So over time, as the brothers married and got older or whatever, and the girls pretty much moved away when they got married. And so they would sell my grandfather their land. So that's how my grandfather accumulated his land. Over time, the brothers had died. My grandfather was the only one living in that era, in that community. So my grandfather still had that mentality of he didn't want any white people hunting on his land. Do not come on my land and hunt. And these white brothers decided they were going to kill him because of it. So they made a plan. They took their guns, they went on the land, and they fired their gun. My grandfather heard it and said, I'm going to tell them to leave. 3 years old, I remember my grandmother asking my grandfather, his name was Joe, don't go. Don't go. Because she knew they had a gun. Don't go back there, Joe. Well, Joe went, and they shot Joe. That was their plan. It was the Murray brothers, and they shot him. No consequences. No consequences at all. I tried to get a copy of the police report. After I grew up, there was no report. They told me that the report would have been in the archives and things like that. Well, by this time, they were on computers and everything. And he looked in the archives, in paperwork, nothing. He could not find anything. There wasn't even a report done. About a month ago, I was on Ancestry, and I printed out my grandfather's death certificate. And it said, cause of death, gunshot to the face.
Oh, that's terrible.
That really bothered me, that they would just shoot the man in his face. And I've heard of shooting people in the back or whatever. They shot him.
It's astounding to me, and it's disturbing to me that this is your life, and that this is a story from being 3 years old, so this had to have shaped your life. Mm-hmm. But the fact that they can just kill a man, no consequences, because why? Because he wouldn't let them do whatever they wanted to do. Or did they resent that he had land?
Yes. And you have to remember from their father, from way back when, you had the brothers who wouldn't allow them to come on the property. So this has been hatred from way back.
I got you.
And they weren't going to allow this black man to tell them where they could and could not go anymore. And it was planned, because one of the Murray brothers, he was a kinder man. He came and he apologized, and he said, I had nothing to do with this.
I don't know. I don't even know what to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that story always strikes me so hard, and I don't know what to do with that. For context, for those of you who may be watching, during this era, which my great-grandfather's great-great-grandfather, however many greats, grandfather Caesar, during the era that he owned that community and had all that land and it was prosperous, was during a time in the United States when anytime a Black area thrived, white supremacist mobs would come in and loot and riot and burn those places to the ground. It's reminiscent of the Tulsa Race Massacre and all the Rosewood Massacre and all these other massacres. So I can understand why they would have been protecting that area. Like, it makes sense to me why they would protect that area. So, sorry, like my mind's still blown. When you're looking now at all the civil rights movement stuff that's happening today with, you know, the death of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, what are you thinking? Like, does it just remind you of what happened during your civil rights movement, or do you have other thoughts surrounding it?
It's no surprise. I don't see any difference. The only thing we have now is video that the world can see what's going on. We in the Black community have always known this. We've always known it. Someone come up missing, you know, you may find them in the woods dead. None of this that has happened is a shock to me.
As you see these new modern protesters, do you have any thoughts on them? Like, how do you perceive them?
Well, I'm happy that they're doing it. It reminds me back in the day when I was young, as a teenager. I was more afraid back then to do things because I was afraid of the, you know, someone shooting me or whatever. I don't see that fear in the people today, you know, and I listen at some of the protesters and they, you know, they're willing to give their lives to make a difference.
But that's still reminiscent of, I keep saying your civil rights movement, but isn't that reminiscent of your civil rights movement? Because people were willing to give their lives then. Like, protesters in the 60s, they had to endure the hoses and the dogs and the beatings.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they were. I was speaking about me. I didn't want to give my life. And the reason, because I always had the flashbacks of my grandfather and my great uncle, you know, death is so final. I feel differently today. And if I could speak to that 16-year-old Betty years ago, I would tell her, don't be afraid. Stand up. But I feel as if I did what I could do back then with what I knew and the culture of that era.
That makes sense to me. I have no judgment for you. You grew up in a family where shootings and lynchings were just like right there. I think I would have been afraid as well. You guys provided such a safe and sheltered environment for us to grow up in. Like, I don't know what it's like to have that kind of fear.
It never leaves you.
This is the end of part 2. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. Then you'll be notified when the next video is released. In part 3, my mother and I further discuss her lived experiences and how all of those things still impact her life today.